This presentation is about GCSE Diabetes. So let's go through the key questions for today. First of all, we need to understand what is homeostasis. How do we control our blood glucose concentration? And how can type 1 diabetes be controlled? And how can type 2 diabetes be controlled? How are body mass and type 2 diabetes correlated? So what is homeostasis? Homeostasis means maintaining a constant internal environment of the body. It's important to learn this definition so that you can answer exam questions. Examples of homeostasis include blood glucose concentration, body temperature, water level of blood and your cells. It's important to maintain a stable blood glucose concentration, our body temperature at 37.5 degrees Celsius on average, and the water level of our blood and cells so that our chemical reactions and our metabolism can happen efficiently. This process of homeostasis is regulated by hormones and prevents damage when the environment and internal conditions change in our body. So how is blood glucose concentration regulated? Well, we have an organ called the pancreas, and the pancreas monitors and controls the concentration of glucose in the blood. When we have a meal, our blood glucose concentration level rises because the carbohydrates such as starch break down into glucose and then get absorbed in our small intestine into our blood. In response to an increase in the blood glucose level above the normal level, the pancreas will produce a hormone called insulin, which is then released into the bloodstream. How is blood glucose concentration regulated? High levels of blood glucose concentration will be toxic to us, so we need to remove it from the blood. The hormone insulin causes glucose to move from the blood into the cells, where it's either used for respiration or stored in the liver and muscle cells as glycogen. The effect of this is to lower the blood glucose concentration back to normal. We know that glycogen is an insoluble compound because it's a large molecule. Glucose is converted into glycogen. The main storage organ for glycogen is the liver. The pancreas will release insulin, and the target organ is the liver. The insulin tells the liver to convert the glucose that's in the blood passing through the liver into glycogen, which is the insoluble compound used for storage. After a while, the glucose in our blood is used by the respiring cells. Blood glucose level will therefore fall. The pancreas will monitor this fall and release glucagon, another hormone. Don't get confused between glycogen, which is the storage compound, and glucagon, which is the hormone. Glucagon signals to the liver to break down the glycogen back into glucose and then release it into the blood to allow cells to use it for respiration. The pancreas is your organ that releases the hormone. The hormone is glucagon, and the glucagon will go to the target organ of the liver and cause the breakdown of glycogen into glucose. So your blood glucose level should rise. When this blood glucose concentration is not regulated properly, we have an illness called diabetes. There are two types. Type 1 diabetes develops early and is genetically linked. Type 2 diabetes develops typically later in life and is related to diet and lifestyle. Sometimes you will know type 2 diabetes as diabetes mellitus, which is the medical term. So how do we treat type 1 diabetes? Well, when our blood glucose level is high in a type 1 diabetic, the pancreas isn't working. If the pancreas doesn't work, it doesn't release any insulin, which means that the storage of glucose as glycogen in the liver doesn't occur. In order to treat this, we inject ourselves with insulin artificially. The insulin injections will cause the conversion of glucose in the blood into glycogen in the liver. This should then return your glucose level back to normal. During type 2 diabetes, our pancreas is actually working fine and releasing insulin, but because of poor lifestyle or poor diet and our blood glucose level constantly being high, lots of insulin is released. Eventually, the liver becomes insensitive to this and so stops responding to the insulin. One way of treating type 2 diabetes is to actually eat a better diet, to reduce the amount of fatty foods and sugars that we eat in the first place so our blood glucose level remains stable. Another way of treating type 2 diabetes is to do more exercise. More exercise will use more of the glucose in respiration and so will reduce our blood glucose level. So how are body mass and type 2 diabetes correlated? It's important to know that a correlation means a link, not a cause. Body mass increase does not cause type 2 diabetes, but having an increase in body mass means that type 2 diabetes is more likely to happen. There are two ways that doctors use to measure your body mass. One of the ways is your BMI or your body mass index, and the second way is the waist to hip ratio. A body mass index is calculated using your weight in kilograms divided by your height squared. This will give you a value which you then can compare against other values to tell you whether you're overweight or obese or within normal range, or even underweight. Another way of doing this is to measure your waist to hip ratio. The waist to hip measurement is your measurement around your belly button to the widest area of your hips around your bottom. Your waist to hip ratio is a bit more accurate than your BMI because the BMI doesn't take into account changes according to muscle mass. More muscular people tend to have a higher weight value. That means that their BMI will skewed to be more overweight when really they're within healthy range. So BMI and type 2 diabetes are positively correlated. A positive correlation means that if one factor increases, the other also increases. So as BMI increases, type 2 diabetes occurrence also increases. Obesity increases the risk of type 2 diabetes. Waist to hip ratio is also positively correlated to type 2 diabetes. As waist to hip ratio increases, so does the occurrence of type 2 diabetes. So, in order to check that you've understood today's lesson, pause the video and try to answer these questions.